One of the most powerful ways to drive growth in a large, complex organization is to bring together teams from different groups. Innovation happens when diverse perspectives collide. Agility emerges when those teams collaborate to tackle challenges with speed and creativity. It's not about protecting your lane. It's about combining insights, experimenting together, and embracing new approaches to solve broader business challenges and unlock growth that no single team could achieve on its own. That's a quote from Kris McDermott and a sneak peek at today's episode. Hi there, I'm Carrie Curran, Fractional Chief Growth Officer, Industry Analyst, and host of Revenue Boost, a marketing podcast, where we discuss smart strategies that can drive your revenue growth. In this episode, titled Unlocking CPG Growth, Collaboration, Innovation, and Retail Media Strategies, I sit down with Kris McDermott. She's an omni-channel marketing and retail media expert. We discuss how CPG companies can unlock sustainable growth in today's very competitive landscape. From breaking down silos to testing innovative strategies to applying a risk tolerance mindset, this conversation is packed with strategies for driving category growth and reversing declines. Stay tuned to the end, where Kris shares tips on getting more out of your retailer and network joint business plans. This episode offers valuable advice you can apply immediately. So let's go. So welcome, Kris. Please share your background and your expertise.
Thank you very much for having me, Carrie. So until recently, I worked at Kimberly-Clark, leading their omni-channel marketing teams for Walmart, Target, Sam's Club, their emerging platforms. Prior to that, I led e-commerce capability and development for Edelman Global. And then I spent a long time at Omnicom in various client leadership capacities, and then in their commerce organization as well.
Excellent. So you've been a CPG and retail media expert for a long time. So what has, talk about kind of the evolution that you've seen and what has stood out to you the most?
I mean, there's a lot that's changing, right? There's stuff that's changing every day. And part of what I think is really exciting is that, that's part of why I like it, is that it's changing every day. It feels to me a lot like digital did. I've read that there's the first wave of digital, which was search, and then there was social, and now there's retail. And I think that's accurate because it's a very similar, there is no playbook for any of these things. At this point, now there is, right? For brand search, you can roll that stuff out. We can set and forget, and you can pretty clear in terms of how you activate it. Social is becoming that way as well. Retail, we're not there yet, not even close. I actually was thinking about this the other day. Retail is actually more complicated because it's everything, right? It's more of It's almost like a data function rather than a channel function. Mm-hmm. And I think that's proving difficult because retail media used to just mean on-site search. Okay, once we started to understand what that meant, that was relatively easy. And then the offering started expanding. And then it became a lot more complicated. So I think it's really kind of exciting, and I don't know, I love when there's something new to figure out, and I feel like every day you're reading constantly about something having changed in this space.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, like you and I think we first met on a Criteo panel long ago when retail media was still relatively new. And you're right, it's changed so rapidly. And I like that you point out, it is a data center. The ways you can buy or promote a brand or buy brand promotion or promote a brand across the retail media networks is rapidly evolving and more complex. And so it makes it harder for a lot of the manufacturing and CPG companies. So from your perspective, how do brands kind of navigate and take advantage of this landscape?
Oh, I mean, I think it's not as a one size fits all solution.
Yeah.
What I do tend to talk about with people is you need to have certain kind of philosophical principles to help you succeed in these things. One of those things is being okay with risk and failure and then pivoting quickly. And
Mhm.
CPGs are risk averse, just like they just are at their core, because they have to be, because that's how you stay in
Yeah.
business, right? Because these decisions that you make one day can affect things 36 months down the line. And
Yeah.
then at that point, things are too far gone to make any changes. I think that risk aversion, risk tolerance, and then celebrating successes and failures and talking about them openly and honestly is critical,
Mhm. Yeah.
because you can't just, now that I've sat at a large CPG on the brand side, it's so easy to be like, well, we could just change this overnight. Why don't we? Why doesn't the president just issue something? It has to be really felt at all levels of the organization. And it
Mhm.
has to also be change management in a way that actually feels authentic and is done for
Yeah.
a purpose. And I also think a lot of organizations are change fatigued. And
Yeah.
especially that's something I used to really struggle with on the agency side, is I would just roll my eyes and say, like, I don't know why they can't just get this done. And one of the first things I did after I'd been brand side for a couple of weeks was call a few ex-clients and apologize for being like, I did not understand your job and I did not understand everything that you were up against. I'm sorry for that. Because you really have to make bets on where you're willing to go after change, because it's not as
Mhm.
straightforward as, oh, well, we'll just change. There's never
Yeah.
a just. There's always, we will do this. There will be massive implications in terms of operations, in terms of what it means for people's jobs. Maybe their KPIs will change. Maybe their bonuses will change, right? There's a lot of dominoes that happen. And that's why leaders are reluctant to overinvest in change, because at a certain point, people are like, I don't care anymore. Whatever, this is our new thing. I roll. It'll change next week.
Mhm.
And you just get
Yeah.
that kind of reaction. So I think that's also what you kind of have to be thinking about is, how do I make this the thing to bet on in change? How do I make
Mhm.
this matter? And how do I think cross-functionally about how this can come to life in different ways? I don't know if that's actually what you asked me about, but that's what I've been thinking about a lot lately. So.
No, no, I love that because we've talked about this before, and I see this brand side a lot. Is it's not I hate that I don't want to say risk tolerant or risk adverse because you're not asking them to do something incredibly risky, but it's the comfort with trying something new, doing something differently than you've always done it. I mean, you point out CPGs have been the gold standard of marketing and advertising and making a commodity differentiated. And to learn new ways to do things use the phrase change management. And there's a big shift, and it's a organizational shift, it's a strategy shift, it's a communication and crossing the aisle shift. But one of the things that you've talked about before was the access to data to inform that shift, and it's whether it's signals from different media channels, but brands today have so many more data points that they need to learn from. So talk about, I guess, how can brands use that data to kind of inform where they should shift and or where the opportunities are.
Well, one thing I did want to respond to is your thought that, it might not necessarily be risky. I think
Yeah.
it's really critical when you're outlining a
Hmm.
difference to
Yeah.
admit and acknowledge what may actually be risky and what might
Yeah.
just feel risky because it's new.
Yeah. Good point.
Because I
Hmm.
think that can be exciting to say this is a risk, but the opportunity and the upside is huge. Or,
Hmm.
guys, this is literally no risk to the organization. It's just one slight shift in how we're doing it. So I don't need anyone to freak out. Right. Like
Yeah.
I think that can help get you some credibility when you're talking about change, to say
Hmm.
some of these things genuinely do represent risk and I'm not afraid of it, because risk
Yeah.
equals opportunity. Because if the way we were doing things worked, we'd be failing, right? Like
Yeah.
we're having some problems here. We need to reimagine how they work.
Yeah. And move out of your comfort zone
Yeah,
as
absolutely. And
challenging
it's
as it
like in
may
some
be.
cases it's just because it's different and that's scary. But again,
Hmm.
not actual risk. And then in some cases, yeah, this is risky and it's a big bet we're making, and here's what that means for the organization.
Yeah.
But as you think about signals, I mean, I think a lot of things in CPG take forever, right? The product
Hmm.
development cycle, supply chain, logistics, things, again, I did not really understand before I came brand side. I was like, it's that easy, pivot. It's moving an aircraft carrier 2 degrees, takes 10,000 people, and it's really challenging. But there are things that you can change in more real time. So I think that's one of the threads that I encourage organizations to think about is what is longer term? Like, we cannot touch this. It's already in the works. We're building a factory and it's going to change these things. We're not going to pivot this. But how can we tweak what's happening in real time in the marketing space, right? Like we can see what people are saying in social and we can build a campaign off of it. And you actually can do that pretty quickly. Obviously in a regulated category, or there's quick is all relative in the scheme of things.
Yeah.
But I think it's a matter of also getting the organization to say, I'm not touching our long-term strategy, guys. That's nothing's at risk there. And I'm on board with it. What I'm saying is, what can be flexible as we move throughout the life of this campaign? And we'll keep moving towards that North Star in 3 years. But what can I do in these platforms that are made to be engaging in real time, right? Like, we all know that social isn't as easy for a big company of just creating a post on your phone and uploading it, but it actually can move pretty quickly. And the companies that are succeeding are responding to cultural trends in a way that is, real time, or again, real time is relative, but in a more up-to-date manner, and then pivoting when it doesn't work. You can also then use those things to feed into the long-term strategy, right? Like if you intercept a product development decision before you say, listen, actually a lot of people are saying they wish we had X. Is there any way we could bake that into innovation? Let's think about it. Again, you don't want to overreact to one conversation being had, and then 3 years later, you've overreacted to one cultural moment, and there you go. But I do think that, there has to be an engine feeding that's really about what you're seeing in the marketplace. And I do think a lot of the insights groups at CPGs are starting to look at data that they hadn't before, right? If you think about insights groups, they used to just be panel experts, right? Like, these are the Nielsen and Catalina experts in any CPG organization. Now, a lot of them are pulling Google search data. They're pulling social sentiment data. That's wild. That would have never happened 10 years ago, right? They would have been like, no, that's all the digital stuff. That doesn't actually matter. It actually really matters. And it gives us much more real, like, look and feel from consumers on what they think about our products.
Yeah, I love that point. And I think one of the things you've said in the past is the 80-20 rule about kind of saving, 80% tried and true, but 20% responding to those signals. So expand a bit on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, in that appetite for testing and learning, if you can think about what it has to be consistent, what is the steady drumbeat that we're going to be doing, even from a marketing perspective, and then what's going to be the test budget and the test campaigns, right? To try something different and to be really purposeful. I don't think a lot of CPGs have a test and learn mentality. They just don't, which is ironic because they do when it comes to products, when it comes to couponing, right? Like they are constantly iterating on this stuff and running A/B tests, running all kinds of tests. Product development, like, that's the whole game, is to do one thing, tweak it 1%, bring in a new consumer group, test it with that. Not so much from a marketing perspective, though. That tends to be much more, no, the campaign exists and it must be sacred. But I also think that we do tend to overreact and change things too quickly in terms of the big idea. So how do you keep the big idea the same, and probably for longer than you're comfortable doing it, right? Every brand, it feels like, is rolling out a new platform every year these days. Consumers don't care. They don't care. They need to remember the long story, but how can you make it work? What are the legs? How can it live with different customers in a different way? How could you say, actually, the longer term strategy is this, and here's kind of a fun tweak on it. And I don't think organizations are necessarily nailing that consistently yet, because then the idea is just, we'll just redo the whole thing. No. The fun stuff can live in the 20%. We've got a really solid strategy. We spent millions of dollars to develop this campaign idea based on data, based on consumer sentiment, based on where we need to go as a category. So let's keep that steady. That will be the drumbeat of the campaign. But then how might it come to life in a different way? I think Mondelez actually does this extremely well, because they do all kinds of fun stuff with Oreo that is like these fun cultural moments, but it's still the brand at the bottom. And I think a lot of CPGs struggle with that.
Hey everyone, it's me, Carrie Curran. If you're a B2B company that sells to marketers, whether you're an agency, MarTech, or AdTech, and your revenue is either flattening, declining, or just not growing fast enough, I can help. I've spent my entire career selling, marketing, and servicing marketers, so I know firsthand the challenges they face, the buying decisions they make, and what actually moves the needle. The truth is, most marketing strategies aren't built for revenue growth, but mine are. As your fractional Chief Growth Officer, I'll bring revenue-focused marketing strategies designed specifically for selling to marketers, deep expertise in agency, MarTech, and ad tech buying behaviors, modern go-to-market strategies that include everything from brand awareness to driving loyalty and retention, and a track record of doubling and even tripling revenue for B2B companies just like yours. So if you're tired of your stagnant results and you're ready to build a marketing engine that actually drives revenue, let's talk. Visit revenuebasedmarketing.com or connect with me on LinkedIn to schedule a consultation. Together, let's build a smarter, more profitable path forward. RBMA, Revenue-Based Marketing Advisors, we're revenue-based marketing that works. Yeah, and so what do you think? Do you think it's a knowledge and translation gap between the brand strategists and the digital strategists?
I think it's a lack of cohesion in the organization, because you always have, like, part of what drew me to sit in the sales organization is because shopper marketers are scrappy. Just like, that's my favorite thing about them. They, in brand, it's like, this is going to take $3 million minimum to execute. We'll need 6 months. Shoppers are like, give me $15 in 3 days. I'll get it live. Like, not a problem. And so there's always, like, now, and that's the challenge and the opportunity, because some companies, shopper marketers are going totally rogue, right? And then brand sees something out in the market and they freak out, and then it goes up to the CMO, and then we've all been in those meetings before. But I think that's part of what's really fun about that kind of the organization is how can you bring the scrappy thinking into the big group, get that group together to begin with, to say, okay, we've got different subject matter experts together, and we need to have a couple quarterbacks. There aren't a lot of quarterbacks in CPGs. There's a lot of people who go 5 inches across and a mile deep. And there's not a lot of people who see the whole picture. And I think that's part of why these things struggle, because you don't have someone who knows enough to say, actually, you know who does this really well? Is this other group over here. Let's see if we could bring them in and figure out how we can do this better.
And so how do you help bridge that education or knowledge gap? I think you've used the phrase of helping people become more multilingual on the understanding the other side of the aisle.
I think it's certainly easier said than done. I think one thing that I've seen work in the past is a pilot approach, because you have to identify people in an organization that are hand raisers, who are clearly hungry to learn something that's a little different. Something I talk about is, let's get a tiger team together. Let's say we want to try something different, and we're going to get 5 to 7 people together, and it's going to kind of be our little side project together. We need to get one executive to sign off on it. And that way, and they need to be from all different teams. And usually what I've done in the past is I've heard someone in a meeting say, I just wish we could try something differently. Or why does it have to be that way? And I make a note of, like, this is someone who needs to join the team, because it means that they've got an appetite and they're a little curious in a way that is going to be useful to the team. Because then once you start to get that starts to help you map out, okay, this organization does it this way. How does that compare to how they do it over here? Interesting. Okay, well, we actually have one thing in common, which is this. And we have this other thing that's in common. We should use different words. Okay, let's start to parse that out. Then you start to figure out how those people can become kind of pulse points throughout the organization to get people excited about learning something different, right? You cannot underestimate the importance of FOMO in a CPG, especially. Because the second one tiny group does something, and if it works, especially, then you can merchandise it, and then people start saying, I heard about this project. Well, I would like to know why I got talked to about this quarterly thing. That's interesting. I'd like to do that. I'd like to get the attention of the CMO that way. And you really can't underestimate it. But you can also do that when it fails, which is to say, we're learning a lot about how we failed and we tried something new and it didn't work. I mean, you want to talk about being bold in a big company, trying to merchandise a failure, that gets people's attention. Because people would just rather replicate the failure and not have to admit that they did it. wrong the first time.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so I really think it's a matter of, identifying people who are interested and then having them be kind of the examples of, hey, look, this
Hmm.
person started over here. She's learning this. Now she's over there. And then we
Yeah.
start to translate, and you can have people in meetings say, actually, just so you know, brand does do that. They just call it this. So as we're
Hmm.
thinking through it, right, like let's just make sure that we account for that. And it just starts to be like an organizational muscle.
Yeah. No, it's so smart. And I think to your point, bringing people across the aisle, sharing different areas of expertise, translating the jargon and the acronyms. And one of the kind of how you framed it up in the past was having a major, your deep expertise, and that minor of working knowledge across the disciplines that enables that translation and cross-functional collaboration. So I think it's so smart. Should be a best practice, but we know it's a lot easier said than done. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's also I encourage managers to talk to their teams about those majors and minors on purpose, right?
Yeah.
Like
Hmm.
you might not even know what you want your minors to be. You might just know the
Hmm.
questions you have. That's
Yeah.
okay. What you need is someone to help you understand. I remember asking one of my managers, I don't know why this one particular thing works this way. And she said, well, you need to talk to the revenue generation team because they're the ones who are setting the pricing. Okay. So now I've identified what kind of the who. Now I need to find
Hmm.
someone over there that I can sit down and understand how do you do this? And
Hmm.
that's going to be my minor for now is learning how we set our pricing strategy and why and all the angles that go along with it. I didn't even realize it was a pricing. It would have been a pricing thing to
Yeah.
get at. So instead, I just started with here's a question I have. I don't know why something
Hmm.
works this way. And again, that starts
Yeah.
with an attitude of trust as well for you feeling
Yeah.
comfortable enough to not go in and say, I need to talk to X team about this one project that I already know everything about. If I knew everything about it, I wouldn't be asking about it.
Yeah.
So instead, starting with question mindset and saying, I'm just curious. I would love to know more about this so that I could do my job better. And then finding people
Hmm.
who know an organization well enough to say, that's actually not who you want to talk to. There's actually this entirely different team that sits in a different office in maybe a different country.
Yeah.
And they might be able to give you some good guidance on that too. Okay, great.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's so smart and so important. And I think, you know, again, the collaboration across business units, I mean, that's a recurring theme in many of my podcast episodes, regardless of the industry or vertical, because there is so much siloed knowledge. And, I think when you come together with one shared business challenge, like I think an example you gave was how do we grow category growth in a commoditized area, right? And then or how do you innovate when the economy is flat, like getting everyone who's already passionate about the products and their brand and their area of expertise to really come together. So I love that. So Kris, one of the your secret, no, I shouldn't call it secret, but one of your best tips and areas of expertise is you've shared that there's ways to get more out of the joint business plans with the retailers. So first, can you talk through or explain to our audience what a joint business plan is, the goal of it, and then share some tips about how brands and marketers can structure to get more out of it.
Yeah. So for those who are not as familiar, who've not spent time, especially at CPGs, but in general at brands, a joint business plan is something that you build with a retailer to say, here's our endeavor to spend, here's our endeavor to get, here's how we're going to track it. That's like
Mhm.
the simplest way to describe it. And in recent years, a lot of companies have split their media program specifically into a JBP because it's so much investment and because it's very easy to monitor, right? To say, okay,
Mhm.
this was my endeavor. I wanted to spend this much. Here's what I got out of it. But obviously, that can get into a really transactional, pretty, write the check and get this thing kind of
Yeah.
mentality. And that's not good because even if the retailer thinks that that's what success looks like, it isn't, because what it leads to is a real bad vibe around the organization about being held hostage by a retailer about the spend that you're giving them. So
Mhm.
instead, what I encourage teams to think about is how can you reframe this with your retailer, not just to say how much are we going to give you, but what do we want to learn together? And
Mhm.
a lot of the time, the retailers are extremely excited to rise to that challenge. So again, it's a prove and unlock kind of situation. How much can you have to determine how much you need to commit in terms of spend in order to get the benefits that you want, such as a discount on ads or any additional placements, access to certain capabilities, etc. But
Hmm.
above and beyond that, how do we bake innovation into the JBP itself? And how are we going to measure it? And what are we going to do about it? I think much like with asking the open-ended question of, I don't know this and I want to know more about it, I also would encourage brands to be more open with the question to the retailers, because sometimes they'll already have an idea, right? Sometimes the account team has been sitting around saying, I wish that we could try this targeting, for example, on this one audience. They've
Hmm.
always been resistant to it. I wish we could try it. They might come with that. They might also not have anything off the shelf. And
Yeah.
that's when they can go back to their insights teams and their data teams and say, this is kind of a new way of thinking about how we're structuring our JBP. How do we want to think about what we want to learn? What do we not know about this business? They can talk to their merchants sometimes about, like, hey, what do you want to know about how this category performs? We can talk to our merchants as well to say, yes, what would you like to? And if we could bring it together to say we've
Hmm.
partnered with this, retailer X on their media solution to say the dollars that we're spending this year are expressly going to help us learn X in order to grow the category by Y%. Okay, that's an interesting story. And
Hmm.
traditionally, you keep that line review and the media separate, but they're all investments. It's all one check that's getting written.
Yeah.
So how can you
Yeah.
think about this as a truly strategic lever with the retailer instead of the cost of doing business? Whatever, put your arm behind your back and write this check, and no one in the organization is happy about it, but they feel like they have to
Yeah.
in order to.
Hmm. Yeah. No, it's such a smart example of a lot of the best practices you've recommended already. The collaboration, the bringing in insights or opinions or ideas from the different stakeholders and business units, and really making sure that you're collaborating on those kind of shared business challenges, and to get more out of the JBPs. I think all marketers want that, to your point, both on the retailer side and the brand side. So really, really smart.
And I think retailers are also thinking about, to your point, they know that there's not an infinite amount of money, and they want people to feel good about the money they're spending, right? They want
Hmm.
there to be, they want this to work. At least
Yep.
in theory, the reason that you're spending dollars with a retailer media network is to drive dollars with the retailer, right? That's why you have the dollars there and not with a third party. So
Yep.
they're incented to make this stuff work. And I think people sometimes forget that. Again, I think a lot of it's because of the lack. There's historically been so much measurement incongruity and that kind of thing that maybe
Hmm.
there's been a little bit of, I don't necessarily buy it. But
Yeah.
as measurement especially is getting smarter and they're able to prove the incrementality or lack thereof of the dollars
Hmm.
that suppliers are spending with them, they're accountable for that.
Yeah, no, this is great. And thank you so much. So, um, my last question for you is for the listeners who have or have learned so much from you and they're chomping at the bit to get started. Like, what's a good first step they should take to start kind of bringing any of these ideas to their organization?
Well, that's a fun question. Um, I'll have a few thoughts on that, and they take them for what they're worth, of course, as everything that I've said. The first is to look at the challenges in front of you and map out who you think might be able to, someone new that might be able to talk
Yep.
to about the challenge.
Yep.
I think that's a good exercise for anyone to do, which is like talk to some new people in your company about the problems in front of you. And you can even make it a team exercise. Say, I want everyone here to talk to a new person in the next 2 weeks, specifically
Hmm.
about the problems that we're solving. And let's get a perspective from the outside on what that looks like. But I also think it's also helpful to raise your hand and say, how can I help? There's not a lot of people who, those quarterbacks, the multilingual people,
Yep.
audit your own major and minor and think about what
Yeah.
you want to do, and what you don't know. And as you're
Hmm.
thinking through those other people that you're talking to in the organization, also think about your minors and think about, I actually would really like to learn this one specific discipline. It's a little different than what I've done before. And see if you can bake that into your objectives for you personally. I think it's just a lot of a lot of magic can happen when you start to learn something different and to translate.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
everyone is really busy. So the more that you can raise your hand and say, how can I take something off of your plate,
Mhm.
and use that as an opportunity to learn, it's a big, big
Yeah.
deal. And I think that's my number one piece of advice for anyone in a big organization, especially.
Excellent. Kris, thank you so much for all of your time and sharing your expertise. So, how can people find you?
I'm pretty easy to find. I'm a lucky early adopter of LinkedIn, so you can find me at Kris McDermott, just as my URL, easy. And my email is kris.mcdermott@gmail, so another easy one for people to remember.
Excellent. I will put that in the show notes. Thank you again. And I learned so much. So, thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. This is great. So happy to be here.
I hope you found this episode of Revenue Boost and Marketing Podcast as valuable as I did. I love my conversation with Kris because she's a true CPG expert and her recommendations are so valuable, especially those for getting more from your JBPs or joint business plans. If you found this helpful, please be sure to subscribe to Revenue Boost, a marketing podcast, for more expert advice on smarter marketing strategies. We can be found in all the top podcast directories. I invite you to connect with me, Carrie Curran, on LinkedIn and check out revenuebasedmarketing.com, where I share more expert advice and the past podcast episodes you may have missed. If your revenue needs a boost, be sure to ask me about my consulting and fractional chief growth officer services. I look forward to hearing from you soon. Thank you.